Almost all potential successors to Prime Minister Boris Johnson swear by the economic policies of our former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. And, well, people here call this a stupidity. Whoever moves into 10 Downing Street after Boris Johnson is completely open on only one thing is already clear. He or she will lower taxes. Tax cuts are the order of the day, and all prime ministerial candidates have committed to it. They promise an economic policy in the spirit of Margaret Thatcher and present themselves more or less as a kind of reincarnation of the Iron Lady. The debate about Johnson's successor is characterized by nostalgia. The longing for the supposedly good old days is quite great. And so post-Brexit, there's a renewed danger that the Tories will be guided by ideology rather than what the country really needs, and that's pragmatism. Pragmatism is a virtue that Tories are claiming for themselves. Some even claim that pragmatism is not only typically British, but something deeply conservative. Well, if that's true, there hasn't been any sign of it for a very long time. The Tories have had 3 prime ministers since 2010. All 3 are responsible for the biggest economic shambles in the country's recent history, Brexit. The consequences of leaving the EU will determine the term of office of the next prime minister, as will the consequences of the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that won't be easy. The most urgent problem is the cost of living crisis. As everywhere in Europe, the cost of living has risen sharply in Great Britain. At 9.1%, the inflation rate is significantly higher than in Germany or France. For the autumn, the Bank of England expects a further increase to 11%. In other respects, too, the kingdom is in a bad position in international comparison. The OECD expects growth to stagnate in the coming year. According to this, only one of the G20 countries has a work prognosis, and that's Russia, with all the sanctions. Johnson's would-be successors have identified tax cuts as a recipe against the impending crash. This is politically understandable because there are few more popular among the Tories. At the core of Thatcherism is the promise of a lean state that will do whatever it takes to allow citizens and businesses to thrive. Similar to US President Ronald Reagan, the Iron Lady reformed her country in the 1980s in line with the neoliberal school of thought. The bottom line is that the ideas of Friedrich August von Hayek and Milton Friedman led to contradictory results. It was possible to revitalize the economy, but at the cost of growing social disparities and dramatically higher government debt. So the question is whether this economic policy makes sense in the current situation, especially tax cuts. Such a step is extremely questionable from an economic point of view, because anyone who lowers the tax burden for citizens and companies must know that this will increase consumer demand. This in turn leads to an increase in prices, which would fuel inflation even further. Dare more Thatcher is therefore not a good idea, especially since Great Britain has developed in the spirit of the Iron Lady in the past few decades anyway. In a European comparison, the country has a rather moderate tax burden. Deregulation is also much more pronounced than in Germany, for example. Instead of pushing this further, a new prime minister should think better about the status of digitization and the expansion of climate-friendly energies, and that means future growth. And in addition, there is what the pandemic has revealed once again, the inequality of living conditions. The ailing healthcare system is by far more overburdened in the poorer northern regions than in wealthy London. It is not without reason that Johnson launched a levelling up agenda to strengthen economically disadvantaged regions, although he was doing that for votes, but still. And there, in the former strongholds of the Labour Party, the Tories won the last election. If they don't want to lose the next one, the state has to invest there. But where's the money supposed to come from when the next prime minister lowers taxes? But that's why nobody's talking about levelling up at the moment, probably. After resigning as leader of the Conservative Party, Boris Johnson will soon be history as British Prime Minister. His egocentric posturing, the scandals, the corruption and the lies, all over. But that doesn't mean a change in politics. The candidates who must qualify to succeed him are loyal followers, and that with just 2 exceptions, and one of them is gone now. Of course, the candidates are dealing with a cleansed party. Johnson had used the unconstitutional suspension of Parliament in 2019 to expel numerous opposing more liberal Conservative MPs from the group, if not from the party. What remained was a Brexit party, which has moved significantly further to the right. This explains why the candidates largely come from the right-wing political spectrum and present themselves accordingly. They all try to distinguish themselves with topics that are intended to symbolize, true conservative politics, whatever that might be. With the exception of Sunak, almost all of them are happily promising tax cuts, even if they aggravate current inflation, as I told you earlier. The corporate tax is to be further reduced from the current 19%, but at least not as planned increased to 25%. The increase in social security contributions should be reversed, and in case of doubt, even income tax or value-added tax on fuel should be reduced. The only difference between the candidates is how quickly these tax breaks should come. Almost all candidates, including Tom Tugendhat, who tends to be from the political center, are insisting that the planned law, which is intended to overturn the Northern Ireland Protocol, be passed by Parliament. So even Tugendhat claims that the law is important as a bargaining chip with the EU. So even he doesn't understand it. Given the Tory shift to the right, it's also not surprising that the candidates want to stick to the controversial policy of flying illegal refugees to Rwanda. Not a single candidate dares to say that Brexit may have been a mistake. On the contrary, the myth that the advantages of Brexit would first have to become apparent is being maintained. Even candidates who in 2016 still voted for Britain to remain in the EU, such as Liz Truss and Tom Tugendhat, are following this line. The candidates promised to stimulate the economy, but none of them commented on the real problems. The lack of productivity, the meager growth of the past 15 years, the standard of living that has fallen further and further below international comparison, and investment in businesses and research that has been too low for decades. Not even environmental issues are discussed because the right-wing Conservative Party would like to overturn the expensive zero emissions target of 2050. How taxes are to be reduced and at the same time money is to be made available for the ailing health and school system, and of course public services, are to be better paid. Well, that's also not an issue. It's hard to say who will succeed Johnson in this drama. The faction and the party are so tactical that the initial top candidate may not get in the end. It's currently, as you heard in another video, former Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak, if you believe the list of the betting shops. Mordaunt and Truss also have good chances, but that doesn't have to mean anything either. Sunak has been working on his appearance as future Prime Minister for a long time. Already in the spring, he was Johnson's most dangerous possible successor. And then the UK media suddenly made aware of the tax status of his wife. The former hedge fund manager was taxable in the US until October 2021 because of an American green card. And his wife also did not pay UK tax on the income from its shareholdings. And both are among the richest in Britain, with assets of more than £730 million according to the Times. And that's not exactly what's going down well in working class constituencies in the north of England. But of all the candidates, Sunak is taking the most sensible course in terms of economic policy. As former Chancellor of the Exchequer, he knows that all the fairy tale tax cuts that his competitors are promising have to be financed. The moment we get over the inflation, I'll cut taxes is what Sunak says, but not now. And several staunch Conservative politicians think the same way, including former Treasury Secretary Kenneth Clarke, who condemned the rubbish of populist talk of tax cuts on Monday. I love him on Twitter, by the way. Former Secretary of State William Hague has warned that the race for tax cuts is jeopardizing the Tories' reputation as an economically responsible party. But it's not about reason, it's about emotions and betrayal. The political right in the faction does not forgive Sunak for stabbing Johnson in the back when he resigned on July 5th. They portray him as the regicide and loyal servant of the hated Treasury, which has so often curbed the current Prime Minister's generosity. A poll of Tories on the Conservative portal Conservative Home shows which candidates are preferred in the party. Sunak is third on the list, but Penny Mordaunt, Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman and Liz Truss are at least as popular. They are all women who have remained loyal to Johnson as members of the government and who are telling the political right just what it wants to hear. The election of Boris Johnson as party leader and Prime Minister in July 2019 showed that the faction's organized right can steer the election process in such a way that their candidate ultimately wins. Johnson was the least qualified person among the candidates at the time, but he was ready to deliver the exit from the EU to the Brexit hardliners. All other candidates were outmaneuvered in the electoral process. I still don't understand why they have a system where Parliament decides that, but still. Former Foreign Secretary and political strategist under Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson, recently warned, "The only chance for the Conservative Party to recover quickly is to completely distance itself from the Johnson era and elect someone who has nothing to do with Johnson." Well, this is just wishful thinking. The Tories will do the opposite. A real change in the United Kingdom comes at the earliest with the next general election, and possibly not even then. I'll see you in my next video. Schau vorbei.